right. Oh, you can hear me.
Brenton.
Hi, Cesar. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Great. So, really excited to have Cesar Herrera with us today. He's founder at Yuvo Health, which AlleyCorp, which is a fund I'm a partner in, is a proud investor. So I serve on Cesar's board, and both of our organizations are New York rooted and based. So, want to just kind of use this opportunity to delve into specifically Medicaid and the role of value-based care that is increasingly being played in Medicaid, where Yuvo is really on the front lines. And Cesar himself has a really interesting personal story as well. So thought you could maybe start there in terms of your background and maybe some of the more unique aspects as it comes to healthcare entrepreneurship.
Yeah, so let's take you way back then. So I grew up here on the east side of Detroit. I was a first-generation immigrant here. I moved here when I was 5 from the Philippines to a working-class family in a working-class neighborhood in the east side of Detroit. And because of that, we didn't have health insurance for the vast majority of our own childhood. So as you can imagine, it can be very difficult for us to find access to primary care wherever we were, and we moved a lot. But the saving grace for us is we had access to what are called federally qualified health centers. These are amazing organizations that provide primary care and wraparound services to individuals, regardless of your ability to pay. They are mission built that way. We're also regulated by the United States in that way. And if I didn't have access to them, I literally wouldn't have access to primary care. I'd have to go to the ER for primary care, and no one should go to the ER for primary care. But when I take a step back and think and reflect on that, and really that experience was some of the impetus for why I entered into healthcare, is because it should never be a matter of luck that any individual has access to care. And currently, there are 20 million individuals across the country that need access to primary care that don't have access to an FQHC. And that's really kind of started in my journey within doing healthcare policy and then working within healthcare systems and health plans to create better access, and then eventually to start Yuvo.
Fantastic. And so tell us a little bit around, you shared how access to primary care was so fundamental growing up. How has that helped you identify different opportunities and needs in Medicaid?
In terms of access, when you think about general Medicaid populations, right, we're not talking about subpopulations like frail elderly or PACE or anything like that. We're talking about general Medicaid, and you're talking about the kind of the institutions that have created those disparities within the communities that we're serving here, then you realize just how much lack of access drives high cost utilization in care, right? When we're talking about the populations that we're serving, and I know we'll get into it a little bit later, for the Medicaid populations that many of our FQs are serving, what we've seen is a large, a high utilization of ER visits. And when we took a step deeper in that, we found that 1/3 of those ER visits are in healthy children under the age of 18, right? There's no reason why a healthy child would be going to the ER, except because they don't have access to a pediatrician or a primary care setting, right? So that's what we're really talking about here. It's not like newfangled ways to do care management or like new, innovative technologies to fix this or that problem. It is simple listening to communities, getting to them where they are at so that they don't have to decompensate and end up going into the ER.
Fantastic. And so tell us a little bit about your specific startup, Yuvo.
Yeah, so what Yuvo is we support federally qualified health centers. As you can imagine, that's my life experience. I'm excited about supporting them because they are crucial institutions within the healthcare ecosystem, specifically for disenfranchised communities. I obviously benefited from it. And if you ask any FQ why they don't serve more people, it's not because they don't want to, it's because they don't have capacity to do that. And our mission is to increase their capacity. And the way that we feel really confident in doing that, given the years of experience I've had and in value-based care, is through value-based care. There is a lot of opportunity for providers in this market, not just in Medicare, but in Medicaid, to take on risk because they are most apt in managing and shepherding their patients into lower cost settings and maintaining their health. Problem is FQHCs are not allowed to take on downside risk. So quite honestly, we built ourselves out of necessity. Because without us, our FQHCs would be left out of that equation and no longer have access to that revenue, which we know that they would have used to increase their capacity of care.
And you just went through a $20 million fundraise in this tough market. Do you want to share any insights for folks around startup fundraising and what that process was like?
Oh my God. Yeah, that is not a fun market to raise capital in right now. I'm sure you all know that. It's also not compounded from my perspective of innovation in Medicaid, because there's a good number of investors that really don't understand that space. Mainly because most of the innovation has been happening on the Medicare side, right? Particularly when we're talking about value-based care models, because we're talking about higher cost patients. What I've grappled with is a lot of like general ignorance in the market of like, how should I think about Medicaid? And because of that, some preconceived notions in regards to what Medicaid is, who the patients are that they're supporting. My only real recommendation for individuals that are trying to raise capital is, be persistent, be diligent, don't give up, because I know that if I had, then we wouldn't have been able to have access to this capital that we're using directly to serve our FQHC partners.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned some misconceptions, whether there are folks who are ignorant to Medicaid or even folks who are getting deeper into it. What are some of the misconceptions that are helpful to know about as people think about entering the space or partnering in the space?
Yeah, I think of the misconceptions in two general categories. One is like, fair ignorance, and the ignorance from, okay, what may work in Medicare, and organizations that have tried doing things in Medicare and translating that into the Medicaid space and saying, oh, this doesn't work in Medicaid, and automatically assuming it's because Medicaid is the problem or the communities that are being served by Medicaid is the problem, versus these are two vastly different populations, and what may work in a Medicare population should not and would never be applicable to a Medicaid population, right? And you have to do something different. And I think that's kind of the general misconception I get. The other misconception is because, yes, Medicaid premiums are much lower than Medicare premiums, so there's already the assumption that you can't have make any money in Medicaid as well. And honestly, because of the relative dearth of precedent in the Medicaid innovation space, it's just really hard to compare. So I think a lot of people just simply fall back on, why haven't the Medicare innovation companies been able to be successful in Medicaid? And it's with the assumption that it's because patients in Medicaid don't want to be helped, don't want to be engaged, which are all incorrect.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you mentioned the Medicare market, obviously, in value-based care is much more mature than Medicaid. Yuvo is an example, early stage startup, starting to provide this innovation in the Medicaid space, but you're not alone. We'd love to hear how you think about the landscape of innovation going on, both from startups as well as policy-wise, what might be helping drive this next wave of innovation.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great policy that's happening, particularly being led by CMS and the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, wherein they're really pushing providers to be able to take on risk and being as creative as they can around different models that enable large and small providers to be able to take on risk, because they know that that's kind of the key to sustainability in a value-based care model. And on our side, in the Medicaid side, then we're seeing lots of states choosing to be much more innovative, whether proactively by choice or by they have no choice because Medicaid is a third of their budget and they're trying to figure out how to be financially sustainable with their taxpayer dollars. That's also creating a lot of room for different innovation which we're seeing in not just blue states, in many heavily red states, seeing a lot of interesting innovation happening on alternative payment models in Medicaid, because again, they have to be sustainable. So I think that's also what's pushing a lot of organizations like us that are in this space to really be encouraged to support Medicaid populations. And how I think of it is, since we're not a point solution, we're more of an ecosystem. I love when there are more organizations that are kind of going into this market, creating those different solutions, because I can partner with them in different ways, since we're acting as the risk-bearing entity. And I would say, right, we're talking about a population, or Medicaid serves about 1/3 of the US population. There's a lot to go around, a lot of opportunity state by state for us to be able to support. So the more players in this market, the better, frankly.
Yep. And as an entrepreneur, you're often forced to kind of think in the here and now. Can I raise money? Can I, get this next contract? But from the investor side and also your vision side, we're always thinking about 2030, right? What is the world going to look like, and where do innovations like this fit in? Government, CMS has put out goals for value-based care. I think the majority being in Medicaid by 2030. How do you see the Medicaid value-based care landscape set when we get to that next decade?
By the time we get to 2030, I guess I'm more practical than CMS is, mainly because obviously we all know that Medicaid is set state by state. So there's going to be some progressive states and some laggards. And I would say how I think of it is, I'm not here to wait for policy to make those decisions to determine where I'm going to be. I need to inform policymakers across the state. So I am hell-bent on making sure that we show the proof points in the states that we're in, and we're in New York and Ohio right now, to then be able to show that you can create sustainable models supporting Medicaid populations. And from there, hopefully, then we see every other state fall in line and create really interesting models. I am very hopeful, especially when you think about like the 2 states we're in, one blue state, one red state, that there are really great opportunities for us to show that you can be sustainable here.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's a great story to date. Just raised 20 million, launched in New York, a number of these federally qualified health centers Cesar mentioned, Yuvo is partnering with right here in New York. In closing, any last words you want to share with folks? Any asks of the audience? Anything at all, Cesar?
Yeah, keep investing in Medicaid. There's just a lot of opportunity, and not just to make return, or not just to do good, but to make returns. And it's too large of a market for you to ignore.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, bud. All right. Thank you.